I was born in 1999, which makes me part of Gen Z or the Zoomers if you want to. There've been a lot of names for us. The generation of the future, of technology, or of social media. And while I get where these labels are coming from, I'd argue that a more fitting title for us would be the generation of pain. First off, I don't want to invalidate the struggles of generations that came before us, children of war, famine, or disease. But I also believe that every new generation that follows should be able to live a better life than the ones before. And yet it seems like people are suffering more than ever, despite all the technological advancements. Not on an external level, but on a more internal one. We're not starving or dying of scurvy, but rather have somewhat of a disregard for our own life. It's almost like we don't care what happens to ourselves as individuals. A very nothing to lose kind of attitude, which can be anything from mere apathy to sacrificing ourselves and dying for our cause. Which brings me to the topic of death. It's a weird relationship our generation has with death, especially with suicide. On the one hand, this topic has become less and less taboo, and we actively seek to discuss our emotions. Despite our constant craving for distractions, mental health is actually a very important topic for us, and a lot of young people try to solve their problems by going to therapy. On the other hand, it seems like we've become dull to the very sensation of death itself, even going as far as to constantly make jokes about wanting to kill ourselves to be finally done with it. Things like depression, death, and desperation seem omnipresent in the media and our social bubble, and have been that way for as long as we can remember. It's not hard to understand why some lose their belief that life is good when all they can see is constant suffering somewhere on the planet. This might be a part of the reason why a lot of people try to escape the seemingly inevitable suffering with self-destructive tendencies. The suicide rates for people aged 25 and below are at an all-time high, and they keep rising. It's even been called Gen Z's suicide epidemic. And yet we keep joking about suicide all of the time. Call it gallows humor or whatever, but joking about suicide is just pretty normal for us as a means to cope with the struggle of life. But if I'm honest, I'm a bit afraid that saying I want to fucking die lol on a daily basis slowly makes me consider it for real. There must be a lot of pain hidden somewhere for a whole generation to meme and make fun of fucking death itself. It makes sense though. If killing yourself is a joke for you, then you won't be shocked by the constant portrayals of death and disaster anymore. It numbs us in a way, which is quite ironic because our generation's drug abuse rate, which you would think would usually indicate how much we want to numb ourselves, is actually going down since years. However, at the same time, the death percentage of drug users in this age group is steadily rising, meaning fewer people may take drugs, but those that do die more often. A big reason for why the drug abuse rate is going down is probably because our drugs of choice are no longer weed or ecstasy, but rather the things we consume on the internet. People doing hard drugs are usually the exception, and in those cases the motivation behind taking them is often because, as I said before, we want to numb a pain within ourselves with benzos, antidepressants or opioids, which have a way higher chance of killing you than, say, when you smoke weed at a party. That's not to say that our media consumption can't mess you up either. Because of the way we consume content on the internet, our attention spans are fucked from the get-go. With a constant oversaturation of entertainment on the internet and a never-ending task of watching the new content, we've all been turned into serotonin fiends that crave that sweet relief of the refresh button. Most of us can't even commit to watching 5 minutes of a video if we aren't immediately hooked in the first few seconds. I guarantee you that over 50% of the people that clicked on this video didn't even make it this far into it to hear what I'm saying. And God forbid we try to do things like reading a whole book or learning something that takes a lot of time. It almost seems impossible. I've met almost no one my age who has picked up an instrument or started reading books later on in life if they didn't already do that as a kid. It's just that much harder to do when you could just mindlessly browse your explore page or see what magic the YouTube algorithm has worked again. We're now at a point where being alone with your own thoughts is the worst thing that could happen to a lot of us. The distraction of mundane shit on the internet is just that much more appealing than risking boredom and failing to meet the demand for a constant dopamine influx. Even though most of the time we don't even care about the things we watch, we just need to watch something. Honestly, it's just Fight Club all over again.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need.
And lastly, we're the first generation to spend our entire lives in a hypersexualized world. Sex always sells. And this applies to everything, wherever you go. Not just men and women, but even objects or animals. Looking at you, Lola Bunny. This over-sexualization of media tries to conceal itself as a sort of sexual liberation, praising how openly our generation can talk about sexuality and changing how we perceive it. But the truth is that this over-sexualization has made our old definition of sex obsolete. It's no longer just an intimate act between two people, but rather a performance, one that's mostly just talked about and not really acted out. Sex is everywhere, yet we have the least sex since 100 years. Seeing sex in the media or in pornography is no longer just a new thrill, but simply the most convenient way to access and consume it. You don't even have to do anything for it. Why bother with searching for a person you're attracted to, dating them, and then probably having mediocre sex when you could just live out your fantasies and have the best sex possible in your imagination, right there in front of your computer? Killing intimacy for the sake of convenience and then being bored by the monotony that arises is what being oversexed and underfucked looks like. And while all of this may also apply to every other generation that has access to modern technology, it's us that were raised on it, with a connected world at our fingertips and the universe in our pockets. This is a blessing and a curse. Obviously, having the accumulated knowledge of humanity at the ready with just the press of a button is an amazing thing to have. But this also means that every possible distraction is just around the corner. Avoid just waiting for you to fall in. Raising an entire generation on pornography might just fuck them up, literally. And being born into a generation that either sees perfect lives on social media or deathly tragedies in the news might just make it hard for you to feel anything other than euphoric or longing for death. Anyway, you get the point. Then there are also the other things to worry about, like global warming, the risk of being the first generation that has to deal with the irreversible effects of climate change, the fear of constantly being watched, your government turning into a totalitarian state, your mental state spiraling out of control, AI going rogue, humanity making itself obsolete, and what was my point again? I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of pain in this generation, and a lot of reasons for this pain. Trying to numb it or make a fucking meme out of it will only worsen the situation. We are the generation of pain, but we're also the generation that can change the future, collectively and individually. The constant death around us doesn't mean we can't live anymore. And social media over-exaggerating everything doesn't mean that being unsure about your feelings isn't valid. We have to realize that we can do something about that pain by acknowledging it. We need to become David and slay our Goliath.